Recently I was discussing this topic with a friend on sex education, and he shared with me how it wasn't too long ago he had to have this discussion with his 2 older boys. He's a father of 3, and as he laid out all the facts in front of them, they just sat there, and the older son looks at him and goes, "You mean to tell me you've done this 3 times?" And the younger son goes, "Oh, gross, Dad!" But it really shows the difference between the facts and the original design of healthy sexuality that God intends for us. And these kids have just gotten the facts. And as parents, I think we all want our children to eventually embrace a very healthy sexual development that helps them to see the importance of purity in marriage, helps them to anticipate what God has for them. As a mom, I fielded many questions from the time my kids were little. But it wasn't until recently when I became certified in healthy sexuality training that I see there needs to be better education for the parents. So the parents become the primary educators for their children on this subject, and not the public school system. And I think the church needs to begin offering programs that will equip parents to embrace healthy sexuality themselves and be able to train their children up in this subject. I want to show you how the beauty of God's creation in healthy sexuality is lost in the way the public school system approaches this subject. They fail to reveal God's design for sexuality for people in their program. And I want to show you how it's important that the church is the one who steps up and takes the place of that public education system to be able to equip parents. Human sexuality is a beautiful gift from God. Humans are created separate from the animals in this area. It's not just for procreation only, it's something God has given us. And we see this in Genesis 2:24, in the very beginning, where God says that man and woman shall leave their father and mother and become one flesh. Dr. Ron Hawkins, a leading sexual therapist, says there's a dissenting view in the church that sex is an evil result of a fallen world. And this isn't the case, he says. Sex was God's idea, not man's idea. And we see this in Genesis. We see this in the Song of Solomon, when you see the intimate, sometimes explicit courtship, marriage, and honeymoon between King Solomon and a maiden that he's fallen in love with. We see God's plan for sexuality in the Bible, many places. The public school system takes an abstinence-only approach to teaching sex education. They do this because the government funds these programs and mandates that they teach that. In 2011, a study was done that showed $1.5 billion was spent over a 15-year period to fund these sex education programs in the public school system. However, the United States remains on top for teen pregnancy rates in developed countries. It's ineffective. And a lot of states are beginning to see this and pulling out of these systems and these programs. Oregon, for example, they have implemented a program that embraces teaching healthy sexuality to children. They see that adults and parents play a large role in the development of healthy sexuality in children. They also see the need for children and adults alike to have more information on this subject. However, they still maintain a secular worldview, and they won't teach abstinence until marriage. They won't teach faithfulness, and they will not teach even heterosexual marriage. So therefore, parents and caregivers need to become the primary source of sex education for their children. And I believe that the church is where they can get that information from. Clifford and Joyce Penner, leading sexual therapists, a married couple, in their book they say the home is the ideal place for sexual education to be taught. From the time children are little and discovering their anatomy and asking questions on through adulthood, parents need to be able to answer their questions honestly and in a way that is not condescending. It doesn't make sex dirty or the urges and the natural feelings they're feeling bad. It helps them to embrace God's plan. But unfortunately, adults are often as uneducated or uninformed as children are. And I believe, like I said, that's where the church needs to step in. I want you to be able to see today that, number one, parents need to be the primary sex educators for their children. We've seen that the secular system is ineffective and that they aren't embracing a biblical worldview on this subject. So the church needs to step in. The church needs to stop relying on the government to teach our children what healthy sexuality is, and needs to begin. The church needs to begin educating, empowering, and equipping parents on this subject themselves, so that they in turn can train up their children in this. And I think that as parents, you can ask for this. Go to your church and say, hey, I see a need to be able to understand this better myself so I can teach my children. Go and advocate for your children and ask for these resources for yourself. Ephesians 5:32, it says that for this reason, a man shall leave his mother and his father, and he shall be joined together with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. We all know that part. But Paul goes on to say this is a great mystery, and I'm speaking of Christ in the church. And I believe that if we fail to embrace God's original intent and purpose for healthy sexuality, we fail to understand the relationship between Christ and the church. And I think it's time that we take sexuality back from the world and we sanctify it so that our children can walk in freedom and in purity in this area.
Amen. Excellent.